It is 6 p.m. The January 23rd, 2023 meeting of the Dexter Township Planning Commission will now come to order. Just by way of introduction, I am Marty Straub. On my left, your right, Chandra Hurd, Gretchen Driscoll, Tom Lewis, Alicia Abbott, and Christy Mayer. Bob Nestor had an issue tonight. If he gets here at all, we would expect him quite late. But we have a quorum. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You know, I'll be son of a gun. Thank you. I just read what was in front of me.
Yep.
Thank you. Trustee Driscoll pointed out that it is 2024. For any of you who thought that we were in a time warp.
Yeah.
We're a year behind it.
So so I'm really on a roll. I guess at this point, two things just off the agenda for a moment. As Commissioner Hurd pointed out, especially tonight, since the recording secretary is unable to make it here in the bad back roads, our ability to get everything we say on live stream recorded so she can get that, do the minutes, will be very important. So as we speak, let's make sure that we're close to the mics. The secretary is taking some notes, but the recording secretary generally does everything, kind of verbatim when she goes back and watches live stream. The other off-agenda item is I would like to welcome to Planning Commission Trustee Gretchen Driscoll. She brings with her a wealth of local and state experience, so we look forward to working together. Thank you for joining us.
It's not.
And certainly, while we miss Maris Metz, some of her priorities have changed, so our township board rep will be Trustee Driscoll. Getting back to the real agenda, number 3, conflict of interest review. Anybody on the Planning Commission have any conflict with tonight's agenda items? Seeing none. Number 4, approval of the agenda. Anybody want any additions, deletions, rearrangements in the agenda? If not, the agenda stands approved as presented. Number 5, public comment. Anybody want to talk to us about anything? I would just ask that if it is one of the public hearings, you hold that for the public hearing, but if you want to talk to us at this point about anything else, this is the time. Anybody? If the record would reflect, please, 6:04, we open and closed public comment. And now we slide into number 6, public hearings. We have 2 public hearings tonight. The first one is to amend the decision criteria for variances in the current zoning ordinance. The second will be to amend the table with building coverage in the current ordinance. And just to kind of, rather than hold this for just the Planning Commission's discussion, as we take these one at a time, the wording that has been requested by ZBA, and the chair of the ZBA, Brooke Smith, is with us tonight, is the wording that was in the previous zoning ordinance, which should then be 29.06C4, practical difficulty. The variance is a reasonable amount necessary to mitigate the practical difficulty. And the reason this is before us for recommendation of Township Board tonight is that in the, what I call new zoning ordinance, the current zoning ordinance, that wording was changed and it required the ZBA to decide based on what the minimum is rather than reasonable. So anyhow, that's the context of this first one. So if anybody has any discussion, hold it to our discussion. If there's any questions, seeing none, at 6:05, public hearing to amend the decision criteria for variances is now open. Anyone wish to address us? Mr. Smith?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to be here to let you know that, oh, excuse me. I haven't played over here before. Want to let you know that the zoning board of appeals strongly encourages you to adopt this change to the ordinance. We've been operating now for, well, it's really 3 years that we've been trying to function with a variance provision that didn't match what we've done before and was internally inconsistent. And I just wanted to clarify, as I listened to the chair describe it, the new language that the ZBA requested, I thought, was number 4, reasonable amount. The variance is the reasonable amount necessary to mitigate the practical difficulty. Is that what?
Right, now I don't think that's what's in our packet, but I'm just picking it up from what the old zoning ordinance says. I think there's one word difference. The old zoning ordinance was the variance is a reasonable amount necessary to mitigate the practical difficulty. And I think what was in the packet, it may have said the variance is the reasonable amount. I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, what was in the packet, excuse me, sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. What was in the packet from staff was number 4, reasonable amount. The variance is the reasonable amount necessary to mitigate the practical difficulty with minimum struck out.
Which is precisely what I believe the zoning board hoped that you would be willing to do. I don't want to belabor the point. I think you guys are going in the right direction, but we just hated to be in a position where somebody asks for a 2-car garage and we're saying, well, can't you pare this down by 1.5 inches? Because I think, you might be 1 inch too big when we're trying to meet the minimum requirements. So we'd love to have a reasonable amount to work with. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is the preferred language from the ZBA, from the front page, number 4.
Yeah, the only issue I have is that presently it says reasonable instead of the reasonable. I don't think it matters to get, hung up over one word. And I maybe should have said before Mr. Smith spoke that last week, Chair of the ZBA, Mr. Smith, zoning staff, planning staff, township supervisor, and I think that was everybody, met to discuss primarily the privileged confidential communication we got from the township attorney on this issue. Because there was some confusion about, was there case law, was there law? How did this get changed, and was there a reason behind it that we just didn't understand? And while the entire communication is privileged and confidential between the attorney and her client, Dexter Township, the decision was that, no, we're okay with the wording that's being proposed. So there's not an issue there.
So Marty, I know there's gonna be a lot of discussion on this when we actually have the discussion. And I don't wanna interrupt the public hearing, but I know Gretchen and I have some comments. We'll have some comments about it.
Yeah, good. We should have a good discussion about both of these. Any other member of the public want to address us for the ZBA decision criteria portion of the public hearing? Seeing none, that will close at 6:10, and we will open the public hearing to amend Table 16, Article 16.3, Article 16, Section of the zoning ordinance to increase the building coverage on parcels greater than 5 acres, zoned rural residential or recreation conservation or residential uses in the agricultural zoning district to 2%. Before we actually ask for input on that, been discussion with Megan, and one of the issues that we've been up against is getting proper notice in the newspaper for this meeting, what the level of information was that went into it. The calculation is a little bit complicated, and we can discuss all that when we get to that. But I've got a different proposal. The last proposal that came in the packet, if you go through it, it'll increment, and then it starts going the other way, and that's just the way the math works out. The way that table, and I don't understand the origin of that table from less than 0.3 acres through 5 acres. I don't know where that came from, but we'll discuss that in a moment. But when the time comes, I do have a different proposal. You can, take it, not take it, modify it, whatever, but I've got a problem with the way the math is that's in front of us. It doesn't make any sense that, and it's the way the math is, but we get to a couple of points where somebody has more acreage, but now they've got less lot coverage. So I tried to address that. I've got on the backside of it, the math that went behind it, but it's not especially, the details not especially germane to the public hearing. I just want to make it clear that as far as I'm concerned, what we're going to discuss, what we're going to ultimately do will be something different than what was in the packet that has 2%, and there's a way of getting to that. Also, in that meeting that we had, last week, we had the township attorney on the line. Some of us were wondering, well, the public notice in the paper and what's in our packet was very specific, that this is what's before us. And we were assured that, no, it's the topic that's before us. Planning Commission can come up with whatever they want to recommend to the township board, and it doesn't negate the validity of the public notice that's already been given. So that'll also be part of the context when we get to that. So, at 6:10, I said this is the public hearing, and then I talked for 3 minutes. But anybody care to address us on this issue in the public hearing?
Good evening. Bradley DeVries, Flow Tide Studio Architects. I'm here for you tonight as a representative of Corman Farms, and our project is the 100% genesis of this revision, but I know it is a large part. So, first want to thank everyone who's been involved in kind of seeing this through as a proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance. It's one that we are very much fully in support of, for a couple reasons. One, when Corman Farms was built speaking specifically to Corman Farms, when Corman Farms was built or expanded originally as part of a site plan approval process in 2013, the ordinance then allowed for lot coverage up to 10%, and then based on the square footage or the acreage of our lot, which is like 22.6 acres, we would be capped at the previous notated 11,543 square feet that applies to 5 acres or greater, which equals to about 1.1 and 1.2%, like very fractionally small percentage. So this amendment, which we think is more consistent with the intent and the spirit of the original ordinance and maybe where this ordinance was supposed to be going, but the table sort of got inadvertently truncated, helps us to continue to operate as we are to improve the property and move forward with the site plan application that you already saw and approved on a preliminary level. We did go to the BZA on 2 occasions. The first we tabled it, the second we saw to a vote, and we did not receive the variances that we needed. First requesting 2.5, which we tabled, and then coming back with the 2% there, which is essentially exactly what we have on the property now. So we're not looking to intensify our use in any way, but only to improve the use and diversified, as we talked at length during our original site plan approval. So we're in support of this for the very fact that, you know, it's going to obviously help us with our proposal, but I think in the greater scheme of things, it just doesn't make sense to, you know, apply the same square footage rather than continue the sliding scale as these acreages get bigger, especially, you know, there are a number of lots in the zoning district, and tally them, but there's a lot of lots that apply to this that are, you know, basically hamstringed by a table that just stops.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I go again.
Sure.
I just wanted to stand up in support of the requested change. I haven't seen Marty's calculation, but the idea that you will slowly get up to 2% or down to 2% makes a lot of sense to me. That, you know, that people that have a 5-acre parcel and can have 5.3% shouldn't automatically go to 2% if they have a 6-acre parcel. So working your way down through a sliding scale makes a lot of sense. And I think, once again, this is a situation where the old zoning ordinance, when it got amended, there just wasn't quite enough care taken to make sure that things like the thing that we just talked about in the variance language didn't get messed up, and this too is a thing that simply needs to be fixed. The ZBA was asked to fix it for Cornman Farms, but given our criteria for granting variances, there wasn't a basis for granting a variance, but there certainly is a basis for you folks to amend the ordinance and give them some relief. So please do it.
Thank you. Anyone else? At 6:18, public hearing will be closed for the building coverage issue. That brings us into number 7, action items, the first of which is, since this is the first meeting of the Planning Commission for the year, our bylaws require that we elect chair, vice chair, and secretary, and recommend to the township board the Planning Commission representative to ZBA, the Zoning Board of Appeals. What is the group's pleasure?
I know we've done this before, but I don't remember how it works. Do we should I nominate you?
You know, I think last time you said something about let's stay the course, and we just kind of did it as a slate.
I think we should
held
stay
what we
the
were.
course. Can we elect Nestor though without him being here?
I think we can, and I think we, unless somebody else, you know, wants to do any of these. I know that he's got some issues tonight, but he did not seem opposed to the whole concept. He recognized that last time we railroaded him into it, but overall he didn't seem to have an issue the last, what was it, our last meeting, November, as we were walking out, so.
Well, are you willing to serve again as chair, Marty?
I'll do it another time if you'll have me. At some point, we probably need to transition to something else, but I can do it for another year.
Okay, good. Mr. Lewis, secretary?
Yeah, I'm okay with going forward.
And just to be clear, I've also been the Planning Commission's rep to ZBA. So you want to include that, also recommend that to the Township Board? All right, moved by Mayor, is there support?
Support.
Support by, I heard Driscoll first. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 Those opposed, no. Motion carried. Item B is Planning Commission's discussion on the recommendation of Township Board for the decision criteria for the Appeals. In our packet, we've covered that the wording is acceptable and requested by ZBA. My only question was, well, why don't we just do instead of the? Because that's exactly how it was in the old one, but I don't have strong feelings on that either way. I sense that you have a more substantive discussion than my
Well,
one word.
I just wanted to point out that the zoning ordinance that was adopted in 2020, does use the word minimum, which must have been introduced shortly before that. I did go back to a ZBA meeting in April 2023, where staff at that point felt like the consultant introduced it late in the game and didn't have a lot of history to that. It wasn't introduced by any of the boards reviewing it at that time. I did notice the variance application does not use the word minimum in the standard, and the meeting minutes of the ZBA for the approval has never used the word minimum in the past 3 years. So, I do support if there's a willingness or a want to take out that word and move forward with the ZBA proposal, I would do that. It may have been pointed out already, and maybe I just wasn't listening. The draft that was included in our packet still continues to have the word minimum in there. And Megan might be aware of that.
Did you print that, or did you pick that up out of the last ones that were in the tubs? It should say the and no minimum in there.
Well,
This
and
is
we
what
have
came
three versions to
That's the
choose
version
from.
that came out of the box.
So
As
my
far
copy
as
is
the
not
draft
double-sided,
text
so I printed it from the
versus
packet we
what was
received
on
by email.
line 4.
Yeah, that's not, yeah, thank you. I see what you're looking at. Yeah, I'm looking at what was,
Mr. Chair, I can clarify.
yeah, please.
So, due to notice requirements, the public hearing for this had to be notified before the township closed for holiday breaks, so I think it was December 21st. So the text amendment was written at that time, before the ZBA had met, before we had gotten clarification from them in terms of whether minimum versus reasonable. So that zoning text amendment, which is in an ordinance form, that does say minimum. And when we had been here in November, we had discussed minimum, reasonable and minimum and whatnot. We got clarification from the township attorney also between the time that the amendments were drafted and the notice went out, and now. And essentially what they said was, in that privileged communication, is based on case law, you could choose either one. And the ZBA looked at it at their last meeting in January, I believe it was January 9th. They passed a motion that had very specific language that they wanted. So you actually have two things, two draft amendments in there. One's in our staff cover memo on the front, and then there's an attached memo ordinance form that has different language. So the first one in the staff cover memo says reasonable. The one in the ordinance amendment says minimum. It's up to you which one you recommend, or another version of that. And you'll notice in the staff's cover letter we had, in the motions, we asked you to pick one, whether it be what the ZBA recommended or whether it was the attached motion or something else. So the attached motion is minimum. The ZBA's recommendation is reasonable. You could also have other wording if you wanted, where maybe you could change that and the with the minimum, et cetera. We just need to have it very clear as to what you're recommending to the township board who's going to
Yeah,
ultimately
thank you.
adopt.
Yeah, what I'm looking at is the January 16th memo. That should be the latest and greatest version. So number 4, reasonable amount. The variance is the reasonable amount necessary to mitigate the practical difficulty. And I don't wanna confuse things. hearings, but that is so close to the old one where instead of the, it said That was just what I scribbled down, that, but as I said, I'm not big on whether it's or the, unless somebody else is. And I guess a little more background on these is that both of these public hearings, it was kind of mentioned earlier, are really a result of out in real usage, real application in the township. These are a couple of issues. Now, staff is going through a more comprehensive to try to get some of these on a proactive basis before we find out that, this doesn't really work like we expected it to. So these are the first couple that need to be fixed with some urgency. Hence our meeting tonight, even in the inclement weather.
Marty, did you feel there could be a confusion between using a reasonable amount versus the reasonable amount and what you're proposing?
So when we had the meeting to try to make sure that the wording got here, the wording that would satisfy not only ZBA, but resolve the issue got here, it came with the. And it was after that that I looked at it and said, well, the old one just said, and the attorney said it could be, whichever, we don't need minimum in there, so why would we just not drop back to what it was? But, I probably already confused it more than it needed to be, I don't care, it just, there would be some logic to me in, okay, the old one was okay, don't know why it got changed to minimum, attorney said that we could make it, reasonable with no mention of minimum, just go back to what it was. But, it's up to however the group wants to deal with it.
Personally, I can go either way.
I'm gonna make a motion number one with, do I have to read the whole thing?
No, which
So
document?
motion number
are you
one, page
bringing it
2
from?
would be the January 16th memo. So motion number one is based on information provided by staff and during public hearing tonight, 2024. The Public Planning Commission makes favorable recommendation of proposed text for Article 29, Section 2906 of the zoning ordinance, specifically the text amendment proposed by the Zoning Board of Appeals to the Township Board for the following reasons.
And is the attached text amendment the one
Yes.
on the
that-
front page,
yes.
number 4?
Yes, that's what we were just told. And also, it's in a summary line, paragraph above, right? If I'm reading this correctly. So based on what our consultant just said, that's the most recent request of how we want to address this challenge we've had over the last 3 years?
Yep.
Correct? Yeah.
Well, I kind of take issue with it may chronologically have been 3 years, but that was probably 6 ZBA meetings or 5 ZBA meetings or something like that.
Mr. Chair,
Ma'am?
can I ask trustee Bristol for clarification on our motion?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the findings, is it both of those listed below, that the zoning text amendment is not compatible with the goals and policies of the master plan, and the zoning text amendment is consistent with state and federal law?
Well, it seems that way to me. As your consultant, that's what you're recommending. Is our consultant correct? So yes,
Correct.
I would say that those two apply.
But just to confirm, number one should not have the word not in it, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Do we need to read it again for the clerk, for our clerk to?
I can do that if you like. So based on the information provided by staff and during the public hearing held on January 23rd, 2024, the Planning Commission makes a favorable recommendation of the proposed text amendment for Article 29, Section 29.06C of the zoning ordinance. Specifically, item 4, reasonable amount. The variance is the reasonable amount necessary to mitigate the practical difficulty. And that text amendment is recommended to the Township Board for the following reasons. One, the zoning text amendment is compatible with the goals and policies of the master plan. And two, the zoning text amendment is consistent with state and federal law.
Thank you. So that is the statement of the motion. Moved by Driscoll, is there support?
I'll support.
Support by Mayor. Any further discussion? Hearing none, let's take a roll call vote, please. Hurd,
Yes?
Driscoll,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Abbott,
Yes.
Mayor,
Yes.
and Stroud votes yes. So that's 6 yes, no, with 1 absent. Next action item, recommendation Township Board on proposed zoning ordinance amendment, Article 29, Section 29.06C to amend the city, Table 16.3, Article 16, zoning ordinance to increase the building coverage on parcels greater than 5 acres. And at this point, I would like to pass out, and I did this a couple of days ago. I intentionally did not email it out so we avoid any appearance or temptation to have even informal discussions outside of the public. So, as Megan has pointed out, there were some issues based on timing, understanding of what it would take to make this work better. What could get in the paper, what could get in the packet. And the one that was in the packet still has some issues where you extend it out and you go more square feet, more square feet, more square feet, you hit a threshold, nuts, less square feet, and when you look at it, it's just the math. I cannot address, although, well, Tom, you were on the board when the current zoning ordinance was being discussed all those years. I don't know, I have not spoken to anybody who can tell me why that chart from less than 0.3 up to 5 was even in there. So and the decrement, so 0.3 acres is 10% building coverage. And then they incremented the acreage, decremented the percent, so 0.4 is 9.9, 0.5, 9 et cetera. Well, then you get to a point just mathematically where we end up with 4.9 is 5.4, and then 5 would be 5.3, 5.1 would be 5.2, and now they flip. And you actually start going back down, and
Well, the ordinance stopped at 5 acres.
and then everything above that was just gonna be 2%, or was gonna be 11,000,
456 or something? Okay.
543.
So,
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am,
can I offer just 3 approaches?
please.
So, first you can go with the approach of the 2020 zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance before 2020, which for resource conservation, the building coverage was 5%. For agriculture, the building coverage was 10%. And it was just flat. It didn't matter how big the parcel was or whatnot. And I've been working in planning and zoning for over 20 years. Most of the time, that's how building coverage is handled, is just a flat percentage. And it might change by zoning district, but rarely do you see a table like this. So you can, A, just go for a percentage. B, you could have a percentage for something greater than 5 acres and keep that table for those ones that are less than 5 acres if you feel that that's a good approach. Or C, you could extend that table, but as your planning consultant, I feel like that might be unnecessarily complicated, and I think all of you have pointed that out in terms of how that math would work. And one of the things that really in zoning, especially when you're dealing with something like building coverage, where really the person who it usually affects is not somebody like the applicant who's here before you tonight, it's someone who's looking to put a shed or a barn or an accessory building on their parcel. And so, you know, what's easiest for them to understand and what's also equitable for them. So those are the two things I would pose to you as you're looking at that, and really to, number one, start with picking an approach, whether it's a flat percentage, overall, whether you keep the table and just look at maybe what should be adjusted for lots that are 5 acres or greater, or whether you want to keep that table approach, and how do you extend that to things, to parcels greater than 5 acres?
Thank you. And just some explanation on this table. I took the table, okay, we've got what we had, and then added to that increments by half acres. And the thing that's kind of goofy about that is the math behind it is on the back. To make that even work out, you have to then add, for each half acre, you're adding an increment, roughly 150 square feet of building coverage for each half acre, which also does not conform with the scale for up to 5 acres. But if you carry that out to 10, then you end up with 10 acres and above, 3%. So that's what I came up with for the math to get us out here to something reasonable. The thing that, as I said, I don't understand is what drove that table? Was that supposed to fix some problem where before, in this situation, Dexter Township was at 10%? I looked at Webster, and if I'm reading the right thing, Webster's R1 district, which would be similar to our RR. Now, we split it up a little different. This is RRRC, and for residential uses in the ag district, this is not, it's gonna apply to everybody. You know, we're not gonna make a change just because Cornman Farms has an issue, but Cornman Farms pointed out to us that we've got an issue. There's some things in the zoning ordinance that we can't make logical sense out of. If they were in the ag district, it could be different. And maybe they should be, but that's not the way it is. We were 10% in this same situation prior to what I still call the new zoning ordinance. Webster, apparently for RR, which, you know, fits into what we're doing here, is 20%, and Linden also 20% for building lot coverage. They have also impermeable surface lot coverage, like asphalt, stuff like that, that would be 30%. But on an apples to apples comparison, we used to be 10%. Webster, I think I'm reading 20%. Linden, I think I'm reading 20%, just for some data points out there. But I'm not entirely comfortable just saying that, okay, we ought to be 10%, because somebody spent like 7 years working up the new zoning ordinance and thought that table was worth something. Where that thing goes tilt for me is when you cap it 5 acres and above at 11,543. So maybe, rather than complicated table and some machinations behind it, maybe we ought to think about, my issue is that when we get to 5% on the table in the current zoning ordinance, that's 5.3%. You can't say that greater than 5 acres, we'll do 5%, because then the person that has 5.1 acres gets screwed in that deal. It's just a different way to make this not make sense. I think reasonably, you know, maybe 10%. Oh, I also, whatever we do, I would recommend that we have the planning commission may permit greater building coverage with a full site plan. Our current, with this table, says planning commission may permit up to 20,000 square feet total lot coverage on lots greater than 5 acres for an indoor riding arena with full site plan, which I sense probably was to address a particular one-off type issue, which we can drive by and see, and it's a beautiful, you know, beautiful place and all that. But, you know, why would we do this? Planning commission, if there's a full site plan, maybe needs some latitude to go beyond 3%, 2%. Probably don't need to go beyond 10%, but I think that is reasonable, so we don't have to, when we find the next glitch, come back here and, nuts, we need a zoning ordinance amendment because there was something else that was not foreseen. So my in summary, my issue is, without a table, it's hard to make the transition between 5 acres at 5.3 and something else that's reasonable. Now, if somebody wanted to say, okay, 5.3 acres for 5, or 5.3% for 5 acres and above, I don't guess I have a problem with that, and that's simple. And that gets to Megan's point. We still have goofy table that I don't understand, but we don't make further goofy table, which the increment and decrement don't make sense, which is why I had to come up with, looks like about 150 square feet works, but it's still, this is, I don't know how we got here. All I know is that tonight, we need to get out of this. So anyhow, enough for me. What's everybody's thoughts?
Well, yeah, I had the same thoughts when I was going through the packet, that the table made no sense to me, and it did seem to penalize, the more property you had, the less you could build. But, and I do think that Marty's table is definitely a step in the right direction and fixes a lot of the problem, but I do like the simplicity of just using a, 5%, 10%, which would give people a lot of room to build bigger things. But also, I know like the master plan encourages, agritourism, and I don't have any sense of what people might want to build to encourage that. And I don't want to, you can't look ahead, we don't know what's going to happen, but if we did something like your table, Marty, it still might constrain somebody with a future plan. Unless you put in we could build bigger with a site plan.
And part of my thought there was that if somebody wants to exceed, whatever percent we end up with on 50 acres or something, that would be such a humongous building, structure, whatever, that it would not be unreasonable to assume that there's a site plan that goes with it. And if there isn't, it would not be unreasonable to require a site plan to go with it. If somebody had 50 acres and they wanted to build a building that covered 5 of them, that should be site plan type stuff.
Isn't that when you have a variance? Wouldn't that be?
Well, it would not, and that's part of what Mr. Smith pointed out earlier, that with the decision criteria, the ZBA could not get beyond the practical difficulty because this same restriction applied to everybody else as it did to Cornman Farms. It's just that nobody else wanted to do what they wanted to do. So normally, this would not go to ZBA because the zoning ordinance would already allow for it. When they were created, and I think we talked about this last time, or time before, or a lot of times, but also part of what Cornman Farms wants to do, and we'll have final site plan approval as the next item, but they're gonna have a less intense usage. Effectively, what they have now is that tent, and I don't know if you ever get out that way, that,
I was at that meeting too, the planning commission.
yes, thank you. That tent can be there in perpetuity as long as they, re-up the permit every year. And they wanna replace that with a smaller footprint, permanent structure and, walkway and some stuff. The goal seems good, it's good for the township, the neighbors are in favor of it, but there wasn't room in the zoning ordinance or the decision criteria for the ZBA to say that, oh yeah, that's okay, because the practical difficulty part of it. And the root cause of all of that is this darn thing that I think just glitches when, okay, 5 acres and above, 11,543. So 10 acres gets the same. And in the zoning ordinance, typically we treat, 5 acres and above might be a little different. 10 acres and above certainly has been historically treated differently. You can have a hobby farm, or you can have a commercial farm. 10 acres is pretty good, but still, if you're zoned RR, and we do have some pretty good-sized parcels zoned RR, and you wanna go over 11,543, you're gonna be in the same boat. So this is not a very elegant solution, but we have to make sure that whatever we do, we don't just drop off the edge of the earth when, 5 acres gets 5.3, but we really think everything ought to be capped at 2 or 3% overall. We need to get there somehow. Ma'am?
So, I'm new, and I guess my first question would be, I kind of been hearing this from our chair that we don't know why these tables were generated? Is that correct? Is there anybody at the township that, like?
Tom would be the only person that was,
Brooke and I were both involved in that, and personally, I would scrap it. Unfortunately, the timing for our applicants is a concern.
yeah,
I agree with Megan's approach. I've never seen this approach other than what we came up with for this particular ordinance. I agree with Megan. I think it's been a percentage based on a table that breaks up by acreages and gives you a percentage, whether it's a half an acre or an acre, however. That's too complicated. It has a shortfall. It stops at 5.
mhm,
Trying to work that methodology to go all the way up gets that much more complicated
mhm.
and is inappropriate, in my opinion. But again, we've got a timing issue here for our applicants.
And we can fix this tonight. I'm not opposed to scuttling this, I just question, is there some glitch that less than .3 acres needed 1,300 square feet? And this does not cover around the lakes, that's lakes residential, they're in a different,
Yeah, this is only rural residential, RC, and then residential uses in the ag district.
and we may have some very small, non-conforming existing lots that needed that 1,300 square feet. Therefore, we can't just say 10% because you got .2 or something, and then those guys just glitched.
Well, so if nobody knows why we did tables, I also agree that I don't think we should have tables. And we have a consultant who's our expert, and she already said that 5 and 10% is appropriate, and you've seen that in other townships, and even you're talking about other townships having even
Yeah.
bigger lot allowances. So I personally would like to go back to get away from the table. I think it's not efficient use of time when you're trying to approve things. And I don't see the necessity, and I think if we do this and then we discover, in a year that, there's some challenge to this decision to go back, then we reevaluate at that point in time. But I'd kind of like to say, I think we all need to put our 2 cents in. But personally, I would like to see, since there's clearly no historic reason for the tables, I'd like to see us get away from that too. So I'd like to follow our consultant's recommendation. I agree. I'd like it, I mean, I don't have a solution, but I'd like to see this simplified. And
We,
I do like the consultants.
yeah, and I would throw it out there that we used to be 10%. This really starts at 10% with the possible exception of whatever. And if we have a .3 that going forward, 10% doesn't work for, yeah, I guess that'd be something to address, but they probably already have their sheds, and that's already an existing non-conformance, so I think that is the least of our issues. But it's the only one I can think of that, okay, just 10% across the board might glitch, but it used to be. And anybody else have thoughts on that? Something less than 10%, as we start going through this, somebody might end up with an issue.
Well, it's 10% for ag and 5% for RR, right, you said?
In the previous ordinance, it was 10% for the rural residential and the agricultural zoning district, and 5% building coverage for the resource conservation district. And that makes sense in that the research conservation district is, one of the intents of that is to preserve natural features. And so that is the big difference between the agricultural and the rural residential, in that you don't want as much building coverage in those areas that have natural resources that the township's trying to protect. And that also goes in step with your newly adopted master plan. And also then that 10% in the ag district would allow things for building coverage for agritourism, which might be something like Corman Farms, but it also might be something else. And anytime when it's a non-residential use and it's not for an agricultural purpose, it would go to site plan.
So what do you recommend for right now? Should these be split, RRRC and, well, residential uses in ag, I guess goes with RR without damaging anything, but RC, are you suggesting it's split out of this?
What I would suggest is going back to what was in the 2018 version of the ordinance that we had access to, that 10% building coverage in the rural residential and the agricultural zoning districts, and 5% in the resource conservation district.
That's on the bottom of your January 16th memo?
Yes.
Yes.
And then if it is, what we can do in between now and the township board meeting, if the planning commission wants us to, is my firm Carlisle Wortman, we can do a analysis of how many lots are of this smaller size that are in those zoning districts that may have been part of the reason for that table.
Being that this is building coverage, how is this, if we start tampering with this, how is this going to influence the overall lot coverage?
Building coverage and lot coverage are the same thing.
Wording seemed to have gotten changed from the old to the new zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
So we no longer have lot coverage
No.
and building coverage separated? Building is one and the same?
There's building and there's impervious.
Yes.
Impervious right now is 20% for the rural residential, and building is per the table.
Okay, so we do have two.
Right.
Do have two, but
I just used the wrong term.
Right.
So lot and building seem to have been used in the same manner from the old to the new.
in the old one, I looked up the lot coverage, and the lot coverage was the building coverage. And so it seems like in the 2020 version, they added an impervious surface coverage, which again, fits with your values. But then, in order to track, you need to look at those definitions.
The rural residential zoning district doesn't allow for lots less than 2 acres. There might be some existing as nonconformities, but,
Right.
so having a table that addresses 0.3 acres, it doesn't even exist
Yeah.
in that zoning district theoretically.
It's not allowed to
It's not
exist
allowed.
theoretically.
Yeah.
So it seems to me we've got a whole lot of,
So really, the simplest solution is to go back to what that 2020 is, and that, knowing that lot coverage equals building coverage, and go, and for 10% building coverage in rural residential and agricultural zoning districts for non-agricultural buildings, and then 5% in the resource conservation district.
So you would suggest that we change this motion number 1? I'm sorry.
I would suggest that you do motion number 1, that, and, well, trying to find motion number 1, and
It's
then.
on page 3. It's very confusing, these two-sided pages. I know we're trying to save
Yeah.
resources, but it actually makes it incredibly difficult to
So, motion
follow
number
each
1.
item.
So this is what I would suggest, is based on the information provided by staff during the public hearing held on January 23rd, 2024. Apologies. The planning commission makes a favorable recommendation of the proposed text amendment for Article 16 in section 1612 of the zoning ordinance, specifically the deletion of table 16.3 with a to be replaced by a building coverage of no more than, a building coverage maximum of 10% in the rural residential and agricultural zoning districts. and 5% in the resource conservation districts.
I will move to support that.
Okay.
You're moving that.
I'm moving it, yes,
Yeah.
I'm moving it, excuse me.
Moved by Mayor, is there support?
Sport.
Support by Hurd. And would it be too difficult to read that all back to make sure that you've got notes on it, but we should probably read that all back
Yes.
so we're sure that we get exactly,
All right,
I think we filled in a couple of blanks as we were doing that, didn't we?
are you ready?
Thank you.
Please.
Can I just interject one thing first? And on the reasons that we're doing it, it would still be the text amendment is compatible with the master
Yes.
plan, okay? And it's also
One and
consistent
two.
with state and federal law, okay?
I think you just said that taking out table 16 and then the deletion of table 16 to be replaced by building coverage not to exceed 10% in rural residential and ag and 5% in the resource conservation district.
That is correct.
That's the replacement language. It's just basically taking out table 16. Do you have that? You're like deer in the headlights. Like, oh my God.
I know that, I have that down in my notes, and I
Yeah.
can share that with your recording secretary.
Is that-
And just to be clear, the RC is recreation conservation.
Thank you. Recreation.
Well, you just picked up on what others were saying. That's-
Okay. No, I was kind of like, okay.
Okay, I just want to be sure, because this table will apply to residential uses in the ag district, not ag uses in the ag district.
So then, Mr. Chair, you could ask those who made the motion and seconded it if they would have a friendly amendment that it be 10% in the rural residential, 10% building coverage in the rural residential, and 10% building coverage for residential uses in the ag district.
That's
Yes.
okay with the mover and
Yes.
friendly to the supporter?
Repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Sure. A maximum lot coverage of 10% in the rural residential zoning district and for residential uses in the ag district, and 5% in the resource conservation district.
Recreation conservation.
Okay.
That is a good edit, because per the state building code, buildings that are for an agricultural purpose don't fall under the building code and can't, by right to farm act, be regulated by the township
Huh.
under zoning, so, unless they have assembly or some other things in it.
So the mover's good with that, the supporter's good with that?
Yes.
And you got sufficient
I sure hope
notes
so.
on that?
I-
Well, if there's any
I have-
question-
I have the meat of it.
Yeah, if there's any questions, Janice can call Megan, you got it now.
Yeah.
Any further discussion on that? I will not try to restate that. Take a roll call vote. Hurd,
Yes.
Driscoll,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Abbott,
Yes.
Mayor.
Yes,
Stroud votes yes, that's 6 yes, no, 1 absent. That gets us all the way up to seven D, final site plan for a Cornman LLC special event facility. Staff have anything to present on that? Thanks, Brooke.
In your packet, we had a cover memo that had the OHM recommendation that they recommended final approval of site plan. Carlo Wortman recommended final approval with a number of conditions. At the time that this was sent up, we had not received a review from the fire department, but that came in between the packet being published and now. And so you should have received by email a letter from the fire department saying that it was fine for final site plan approval, but they had some other things to be taken care of at a later date. We also have motions. Basically, the applicant has complied with everything that was asked from the last time and specified where dumpsters would be, where circulation would be, et cetera, and brought their lot coverage down to 2%. In your motion, there is something that takes into account that they would be in this kind of limbo land of not complying with the zoning ordinance under building coverage unless this amendment unless the amendment that you just recommended had been put forward. So if you look at that motion, there is a condition that it wouldn't go forward unless the zoning ordinance had been changed to allow up to a minimum of 2% building coverage for lots 5 acres or greater.
As I recall, however, the 2% was not your first and optimum plan. You were at 2.3 or something like that?
Our original request with which you saw as part of the preliminary site plan was for 2.5%.
Okay.
And if this motion to change the zoning ordinance is gonna go forward at 10%, and it's feasible to do so during this approval, then I think we would like to go back to our 2.5% that we originally proposed, which all that would entail would be keeping the hoop house, which we were gonna demolish to get to the 2%, and the future square footage, that the potential for, we're trying to not go back to BZA again. Increases by about 1,400 square feet or something like that.
So how can we balance that, which is their ideal solution, which they backed off of kind of out of necessity when we were running up against the issue? How can we go back to their preferred solution as just described, which is not totally accounted for in the current version?
You could require them to submit a final site plan that would be reviewed by staff to make sure that it matched the building coverage, that the building coverage after any amendments had been made to the zoning ordinance. We're in a little
Okay.
bit of a zoning gymnastics, but
Yeah, all right.
you could do that. Technically, and you could specify in that motion with the addition of the hoop house. Because I don't want them to feel, no offense, and I know that you wouldn't do this, but I wouldn't want to open the door to say that you're approving anything that's not on the site plan, or that
Right,
hasn't been
so-
looked at in the site plan before.
Yeah, really, we'd effectively be going back to the previous version, which I think was the first version. Depending on which one of these I pulled, I might not even,
Submitted, because the site plan documents, the final site plan documents are dated 12/8.
And they don't have the hoop house on it. They do have the hoop house still on it.
Right, because we didn't go to the BZA for the first time
That is
until
true.
12/9, so that happened after, and then I just gave you an amended sheet that showed that proposal as an effort to appease the ZBA. And then we were gonna come back with that here if that was approved, which it wasn't.
Okay.
We've taken a different path.
So then what I would say is based on the, motion 1 would change to based on the information provided by the applicant staff, the planning commission determines that the all that number, final site plan for Corman LLC dated as revised December 9th, you said?
12/8.
It's the 8th of
double check
December.
those are what my drawings
They were
show.
dated 12/8.
Yeah,
2023.
12/8 still shows 2.5% proposed lot coverage.
Dated December 8th, 2023,
Correct.
of and then you would go from there, because then that would be the controlling site plan.
Which is what your review letters are based on.
Yes, this is what all the review letters are based on.
All right, good, thank you. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me that we kind of backed them into something suboptimal, and the solution, whether it's 2.5% or 2%, is covered by what we're proposing to the township board tonight. So it just seems to me that at the applicant's option, they ought to be able to pursue that one, and that sounds like the solution to it, so it does not have to come back here for
No.
what administratively can be resolved. All right. That was really my only comment on that. Anybody have any further questions, issues?
On the motion, number one, is the sub-item number one still worded okay, considering what we've already done with the,
I-
table 16.3, eliminating that and instituting old standards? I think it is, but just.
Yeah, because it says at least 2%, it could be more than that.
But we
Okay.
probably ought to make that at least 2.5%, if we're gonna keep that in there,
You could do that.
okay? It was 2.5%, 2.8%,
2.5.
2.5, okay. To a certain extent, it's a moot point, because we think the ultimate resolution is gonna be more than that, but just so we don't carry kind of a glitch as we go forward here.
We've enjoyed it tonight, but we'd like to avoid future meetings.
We've really liked seeing you all at our
Entertainment.
planning commission and CBA. We've seen you so much, but, yeah, you've got better things to do, I'm sure. All right, anything else we need to address before we proceed here? Somebody ready to make the motion to approve?
I will move.
Moved by Mayor, is there, but we probably need to move one of these with Megan's wording again.
Would you like me to read off motion number one?
Yes.
Based on the information provided by the applicant staff, CWA, OHM, and DFD, the Planning Commission determines that FSP 24-PC-001, final site plan for Corman LLC, dated as revised December 8th, 2023, special event facility, meets the standards for final site plan approval and the amendment to the special land use resolution 13-PC-147. The Planning Commission approves the final site plan with the following conditions. 1, the zoning ordinance is amended to allow at least 2.5% building coverage on a lot greater than 5 acres zoned rural residential. 2, a maximum of 75 people per event. 3, hours of operation will be 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., limited to a 12 consecutive hours in one day. 4, a temporary zoning permit as outlined in section 16.33. Temporary structures and uses shall be required for each special event requiring a temporary structure or where the expected number of guests exceeds the maximum number of guests of 75 as described on an approved site plan. 5, approval of gravel parking lot. 5, approval of the gravel parking lot maintenance agreement by the township attorney. 6, a signed gravel parking lot maintenance agreement is filed with the county register of deeds before issuance of any building permits. 7, approval by Dexter Area Fire Department. 8, OHM review dated December 14th, 2028, and CWA review dated January 15th, 2024.
15, is that what you said?
Yes.
Thank you.
Support. I second that motion.
Who was that, was that Gretchen?
Sorry?
Did you support?
Yes, I support.
Okay, thank you.
Moved by Mayor, supported by Driscoll. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Hurd,
Yes.
Driscoll,
Yes.
Lewis,
Yes.
Abbott,
Yes.
Mayor,
Yes.
Stroud votes yes. That passes 6 yes, no, and 1 absent. Thank you for
Excited for you.
hanging in there with us.
Yeah.
Apologize, it's been so painful.
Education.
Yeah, there's some kinds of education that you prefer you don't get though. But anyhow, thank you. We look forward to it. That is the end of our action items. Number 8 is discussion items, zoning amendments. We've got a list in here. Do you want us to discuss anything specific, or is this just kind of, this is what we should expect to come at us?
Well, what we would like is to discuss the zoning permits and also the changing the schedule of regulations to the schedule of uses. Those are two pretty simple things, and specifically the zoning permits, if those could be called for a public hearing for your February meeting, we would appreciate it, because for staff, we ask for zoning permits for a lot of things where, such as remodels of interior structures, remodels of the exterior where they're not being, where the walls aren't being extended, re-roofing, and in discussions with Chelsea Area Construction Agency, none of their other clients require zoning permits for those interior renovations, the re-roofing and whatnot. It creates a extra level of burden for residents who are looking to do improvements to their homes and to their businesses. And also it creates an extra level of work for staff where they're processing these instead of, actually Cepheda's processing these instead of doing code enforcement work or some other things. There's an opportunity cost with her time and also with the planning consultant's time when we're here helping the township. So if that could be moved to a public hearing with the strikeouts and the changes shown on that, we would very much appreciate it. And also at the same time, changing just the schedule of regulations to the schedule of uses. That table lists uses, it doesn't list dimensions, and schedule regulations typically means dimensions. The other thing is that in that memo that we had in the packet was that for decisions of the zoning board of appeals becoming final. So currently, what the zoning ordinance says, and this is actually language from the old zoning ordinance, as the chair calls it, that required that in order for it to become final, upon adoption of the minute, in order for a variance to become final, upon adoption of minutes or adoption of a resolution, whichever comes first, unless the Board of Zoning Appeals finds an immediate effect of the decision is necessary for the preservation of property rights, so is certified in record. So essentially it means I come and get a variance for my house that I'm building, and then I can't pull a building permit or a zoning permit until the next time the ZBA meets and approves the minutes. Again,
Which is usually not monthly, especially as we get into some of the slower months.
right, so, it just puts it puts folks in a bad position, and it's not effective. And then I looked at least 4 or 5 zoning ordinances in preparation for this, looking at whether they require that window, and most do not. And most will issue it within 10 days afterwards. And you kind of taking a roll of the dice as to whether, because the ZBA decides that if someone wants to contest a ZBA's decision, it goes to court. Typically, they have 30 days to do that, but more often than not, when people go to court, it's not because they got the variance.
Right.
There's some rare instances with that where, I know of where neighbors have sued because a church got a steeple that they felt was too high in terms of a variance.
So does it,
Sure.
does this decisions, like taking that text out, does that need a public hearing also? Or
That would
just
need a
zoning?
public hearing also, but I think because, my recommendation is to look at those three options, whether we delete item 2, not specifying where the decision is final, leave the text as is, and then you always direct staff to prepare that resolution so that is done at the ZBA at the same time, or amend item 2 for a specific time period. Whatever one of those three approaches you decide, I would feel better if we went to the township attorney and just checked in about that approach before we write anything or have a public hearing, because this is one of those instances where if somebody contested what the ZBA decided, it would go to court, and I feel like they would have more context and more access to case law and what to do.
So can you bring that to the attorney because we have to post for the public hearing, correct?
So what I'd like from you is some direction, and maybe we have this public hearing in March. In February, I'll bring something back. But if you had one of those
Okay.
three options that you felt was better, or you wanted me to ask about all three, I could, or only 2, could do that. So in short,
I like 2 personally,
okay.
but I don't know how other people, I feel like staff, they will have time to disseminate it and talk to the attorney and, pros and we're kind of like, caught here in a place, and I kind of feel like if you have a public hearing with 3 options, that could get really, really confusing.
Yes.
So for me personally, I think 2 seems to be a better, there's more process in that one before the public hearing. And not to go backwards, but since I have the floor at the moment, the table 25.1, you asked to be amended, and I was wondering if, as part of that, if you could put the original table in, so we know what the changes are.
This was new. What they did originally is they just asked for, if you look at the bottom of that, if you flip it to page 2 of that, you'll see
Yeah.
the previous zoning ordinance, specifically ordinance 34 amended, required zoning permits for the following activities: clearing, excavation.
Oh, you
Erection,
know what? I was
alterations.
looking at the end of sorry, I missed
Yeah.
page 2. That's
Yeah.
why.
All of those. It asks for a lot less.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Some of them, though, I feel like that aren't in there, like the generator heat pump, those do happen and they're exterior a lot of times, and they'll crowd into
Right.
setbacks, and they, especially in a lakefront situation, can cause consternation. So those are things better having a permit. And we did look at each of these with a critical eye.
Yeah, and then demolition or raising a building, you didn't have whether or not permit or not.
That should be a zoning permit is
Yeah,
required.
sorry.
I apologize.
It's okay. Okay, thank you, Chair.
And thank you for your comments. To your point, I was kind of gravitating toward number 1, just delete that, thinking that our quality control over, we don't issue a permit for something that the ZBA didn't approve, was that staff, in this case it would be Ashley, would be at the ZBA meeting, and before she issues that permit, she's gonna know that, oh, the ZBA approved this, this, and this, which does not require that you wait for the minutes and all of that, but that just, to me, seemed like the built-in quality control. Staff knows what happened, and they're going to issue the permit like the next morning in accordance with that.
If-
Am I missing?
If they've applied for the permit. We had one recently where I guess the applicant came to the ZBA in April, and they just applied for the housing permit now.
In that case, we would have the minutes to refer to.
You would have the minutes to refer to, and in theory, everything should be in the BSNA database and
Okay.
whatnot.
Well, I kind of felt like if we did two, then staff could say, go back to one. Like they could recommend,
Oh, gotcha, yeah.
like it kind of is
Yeah, I
more of
see
an
what you're
umbrella.
saying.
Yeah, I was gonna recommend both 1 and 2, but that makes complete sense that number 2 actually incorporates number 1, when you think about it.
Yeah, I get that now. Okay.
So number 2 would allow them to issue the permits the following day, as an example?
Yeah, it would. It would just be that, it wouldn't be, and you wouldn't need to change the zoning ordinance at all. It's just that there would always be a resolution that accompanied the variance request. So you would probably, at the ZBA, have 2 agenda items, a granting of the variance. If they granted the variance, then, you know,
Approve the issuance of
approving
permit
a
or something.
resolution, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't want to speak for anybody else.
So we would have the public hearing on that for number 2 then in March.
If you wanted to leave the text as is and direct staff to prepare a resolution for adoptions, there wouldn't need to be any.
We're not changing.
Oh.
You're not changing the
ordinance.
zoning ordinance at all.
Oh, that's great.
We're just changing our administrative procedures. So what I'm hearing is the planning commission fine with having a public hearing on zoning permits as presented with the addition of that there's a zoning permit required for demolition and raising of a building, and also to change the title of Schedule of Regulations Uses to have that public hearing in February?
Yeah, I think so. You don't need formal action from us. This is just, we're advising you that you put it on the agenda. We're gonna deal with it.
Yeah,
Yeah. okay.
yeah, I just,
Anybody have an issue?
so we'll continue to bring these to you. The next ones really require a little more discussion, and some might require some community engagement. When Chair Straub mentioned the meeting between myself, Ashley Cepeda, the supervisor, the ZBA chair, one of the things that we had talked about is with these ordinance amendments is maybe having a subcommittee that works on them and then brings full text to the planning commission. That way we could have somebody from PC, 1 or 2 members, somebody from the ZBA who could bring that context, because they see where the ordinance doesn't work based on the variances, and then ideally we'd have somebody from the township board as well, so that it doesn't have to be trustee Driscoll, so when it gets,
Technically, it doesn't have to.
when it gets to the board of trustees, there's somebody there who's been there through the journey, because often what happens is one group will do a lot of work, whether it's the planning commission or subcommittee, and
Communication,
yeah,
I get it.
yeah. But I didn't know whether that was something that, we talked about that in theory, there are no decisions been made. Wanted to talk to you as planning commissioners, whether you feel like that would be a good idea, or whether you really feel like we have the time and you wanted to do this here as agenda items during meetings, regular meetings.
I guess, I don't know if there's a hybrid. I do like the idea of a subcommittee, and I'm not volunteering for it, though. This packet we had tonight, when I got it and I started looking at it, I did find that chart extremely confusing, and the math didn't work up, and I actually did an Excel spreadsheet, and I feel like maybe if there's something like this, it also might be having a working meeting for the planning commission, because those used to be on the agenda, but I've never actually had one
Yeah,
in 2 years.
I think that time slot has been taken by, I think that was taken by local roads, but now did somebody say local roads meets during the
Wednesday
day?
mornings at 9.
So whatever that would have been, the second Tuesday or something, what is,
I think it's the second Wednesday.
Yeah,
is
we
when
meet,
they-
the roads meet second Wednesday at 9 AM.
yeah, but what used to be on the calendar,
Right.
the
It was the
planning
second
commission,
Tuesday,
yeah, planning session or,
Working session.
working session, yeah, I think, yeah, that had been taken, and now it's not, so unless somebody else, this should still be the current 2023, 2024, it runs through March. Yeah, so if that time's available, yeah, that,
Yeah, and not every time, but like, just something like, I found this very complicated, and.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
To hash it out, like,
yeah,
we could, and then it would be more, understandable by the time we got to the regular public
Right.
hearing.
Yeah,
and while those are public meetings, this meeting, you know, the actual planning commission meeting would look more like we've got it together, well, because we would, I mean, it's not just all appearances.
Yeah.
You know, we would have hashed through all those things that, you know, we get to a point and say, well, nuts, that glitches.
Right.
We'd have all that worked out ahead of time. Yeah, and that could be, I mean, that's just the committee of the whole that might meet either instead of or after the subcommittee that you're talking about would deal with some of these things.
I have conflicts on the second Tuesday evenings, so I don't, it depends on what time you're talking about the work session, but there's a good chance I may not be able to attend those.
and I have conflicts
That's,
on the second
typical
Tuesday.
township meetings are on Tuesday, the second Tuesday, so I wouldn't,
Shouldn't be.
not ours,
Oh,
but around the
gotcha,
state.
yeah, okay.
And I go to
Yeah,
other
okay.
meetings.
Yeah, and I know I'm not available on the second Tuesday, because I have a commitment to another client.
But it, you know, maybe the work session could be, at a different time, I mean, maybe we could do like, you know, a
Yeah.
calendar thing.
It doesn't need to be, I just thought that, oh, that's open now, but,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
But I think we need to look at our consultant, because she's gonna be
Yeah.
the one helping us with the work sessions most of all, right?
So what I'm hearing is that a subcommittee is a good idea.
Now, should that come from the township board, that they sanction that committee and set up a meeting schedule for it? Or is it,
I don't think
we'll have
it's
standing
necessary.
meetings?
I can bring it up at the
Uh,
next meeting, but I don't think it's necessary, it's a subcommittee or a committee, and, you know, that's how we're
But
trying to
also,
do the process for the.
yeah, so it's a subcommittee of this, it's a subcommittee of the ZBA, but it's also use of staff time that neither ZBA nor planning commission have any authority to spend the money.
That's a good point. I mean, I can bring it up in the February, board meeting. I kind of feel like we know, I mean, it's very clear, I think our supervisor sent a memo saying that this is, you know, issue coming
Yeah.
up, and that, and she's made the board aware that we have, well, I'm not 100% sure of the whole board being aware, I'm pretty sure at the last meeting, she did bring it up, but I think to be safe, I'll just bring it up in the, board meeting in February.
Yeah, good.
I can also, in our department report, flag that we had this conversation.
So are you thinking the subcommittee would be an evening meeting or a day meeting?
I think it depends on who's on the subcommittee, and like, we could do it via Zoom if we wanted. It didn't,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, it doesn't necessarily need to be,
Okay,
you know,
but they
every,
do need to be open meetings.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, if you don't have a
Well,
quorum,
It's not a quorum of anybody, if a decision does not come out of it,
yeah,
we might wanna get township attorney's recommendation
That
on
would be a
that.
question.
I don't want it to look
Okay.
like it's a skunk works, for sure.
Well, it is
But-
true that it's a recommendation, and this would be the voting body, so,
Yeah, it's mainly, you know, clean up some of the
yeah.
fuzziness before it comes to the body.
Megan's got her list of things. So I will make a commitment to bring it up at the next board of trustees, and you're gonna put it in the staff report.
yes.
Did you have more for us on that issue? So we're cruising right along to item 8, approval of planning commission minutes from the November 28th meeting. I had a couple of minor things, but if somebody else has anything, go ahead and go first. this is just an inconsistency that kind of, so on page 4 of 5, at the top of the page, motion so moved by Lewis. I mean, that is awkward. It looks like for consistency, elsewhere, it was moved by, or, oh, I'm wrong, sorry, motion by previously, motion by mayor. So whatever it is, it ought to just be consistent, so, and the so moved is kind of an informal thing that I typically do, but not especially proper. But
You have to
it shouldn't be in the minutes anyhow, it ought to be motion by or moved by, and it looks like for consistency, motion by was done elsewhere, so, yeah, I would just change that to motion by Lewis, and then the next one, the next bold paragraph, same thing, motion so moved by Nestor, it should just be motion by Nestor. And then on the last page, comments attributed to me, and usually when Janice and I discuss this, or I question her, she's got it verbatim, and I've got no place to hide, but just the way this is worded, I said the Board of Trustees needs to take this into consideration. I didn't like the way that sounded. Board of Trustees needs to take this into consideration. I think the tone of it should be, the Board of Trustees needs to consider if we can move those two meetings that would conflict. The context of this is
May and December.
Christmas and Christmas Eve and Memorial Day might be meeting, well, we for sure aren't gonna, I don't know anything for sure, I guess. I would
Okay,
assume
I'll
we're
bring
not
that.
gonna meet on Christmas Eve, and would it cause problems if we tried to meet the day after Memorial Day? All I'm trying to say is that Township Board should decide if there is a better meeting time for those, or we can just dispense with them, but we ought to have a pretty busy year this year. Getting rid of 2 meetings is probably not a great thing to do, we just shouldn't do one of those dates. So, I don't know if there's
So I
anything
have
that
a
needs to be changed in the
Well,
minutes, but I
we're
just
doing
didn't like the way I read that back in my own head.
I know we're doing the approval on the agenda, but I would have a question. I'm sure the board would support changing the dates, but I think that would be up to all of you to what dates would work for you, if and when you even we needed those dates. So do you want me to just bring it to the Board of Trustees that we're approving the planning commission determining new dates? Is that how you want me to present it to the Board of Trustees?
Yeah, I think so,
Or do you want?
because if it was,
Okay,
if there was an open Tuesday, which sounds like it's probably not that open, shift it to the Tuesday, which I thought was, unaccounted for in here. But if it's more complicated than that, and there's some other meeting listed here that either isn't gonna take place, get moved around or
yeah,
something,
okay.
that's all. We don't have all the pieces, and we could sit here and figure out what day we wanted to do it, but if the township hall has a conflict or something, then we just kinda gum that up.
Well, how about we
It's
just,
far enough out that
Yeah.
there's plenty of time, somebody figure it out. I mean, it's probably all gonna fall on Sam anyhow, figure out how can I squeeze in a couple of more meetings that aren't gonna conflict with something else. But yeah, that I think is really the gist of that. Those were my only
You
things.
don't really wanna change the minutes then, or?
When I read it back in my own head, that sounded kinda harsh to me, the township board of trustees ought to do it. And that's not, and I'm sensitive to that from past history. You don't monkey with the legislative body, the body that really has control of what we do. All the rest of this stuff is, suggestions, recommendations.
Is this already gone to the board?
no,
No,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
haven't
they're
approved it
approving.
yet.
Okay.
you could just word
How-
it at Board of Trustees.
How about the Board of Trustees,
Should consider.
request the Board of Trustees,
Consider.
yeah, to to consider alternate days for those meetings. I don't even know that ought to be alternate
You could even
Tuesdays.
just say we're requesting that the board take this into consideration, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Which one did you pick now?
We'll have to have Megan read that back to us too.
Oh, I wasn't taking notes on that.
No, I'm just messing with you. You got all the details for the stuff when we needed it, thank you. Planning Commission just requests that the Board of Trustees considers alternate dates for those two Planning Commission meetings.
Dates for the two planning commission meetings.
And the next comment attributed to me, I don't have any idea what that was. I question how the Planning Commission resolutions are numbered and kept. I think my big contribution to the last meeting, oh no, it's gonna be tonight's. This was at ZBA. I requested that we staple the packets. So when we undo this, it still makes sense to us, but never mind. That was not even that comment, so I don't know what this one was.
Are they gonna know which two PC meetings you're
Yeah,
talking?
because
Well,
it's referred to
in
in
the paragraph
the,
before that,
Oh,
or the sentence before
Before you
that.
get into it? Okay.
All right? Yeah. So we good with that? Anybody have anything else? If not, can we have a motion to approve the minutes with those couple of minor alterations?
I'll make a motion to approve. I
Is
said
that
I'll make a
Alicia?
motion to approve the
Oh,
minutes.
no, hang on, which,
Alicia,
What?
okay, so Abbott moved, did Mayor support? I thought I
I
heard
will support.
two things down there. I feel like I'm at an auction now, I'm trying to get one more bid. Okay, moved by Abbott, supported by Mayor to approve the minutes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say yes.
Yes.
And all those opposed, no. Motions are approved, or the minutes are approved, thank you. Township Board of Trustees update. Ms. Driscoll, you have
Sure,
anything for us?
well, happy to report that the master plan was adopted formally by the board last meeting, and the chair was there, and we shared our appreciation, but in person, I'd like to say thank you for all the hard work that everybody did to put together a fabulous document. I'm super excited about what it brought together, and it was pointed out that it also ties really well with the strategic plan that was generated with other people, not just, the folks that were part of the planning commission and community. So there's a really great, I think, intersection of our values in the township. So that I know is really exciting. I know you did a lot of hard work on that, so thank you very much. We also, if you're not aware, we have a public safety millage coming up the end of February. Is everybody aware of that? I have flyers in my car that are just informational. There was a mailer that went out to all the residents, to the households, that's only informational about the fact that we have that public safety millage coming up. It did expire 2023, so while it is a renewal of a millage, it's also on the ballot language says it's an increase, and so it's somewhat confusing. We have some summary language on top of the ballots to try to explain that because of the timing. There's a couple months lag time there. I think that, we have In the Loop is coming out, and we're trying to get more and more information out to the community. I did also bring up solar. So I actually today was at the legislative conference up in Lansing, the MTA conference, and I'm sure you've all heard about the state citing legislation on renewable energy and the impacts, and I've been trying to follow that because effective November of this year, if there is a renewable energy project developer that's come into the community and we don't have an ordinance, we have a problem. So that we will be bringing something forward. There's a lot of questions, and I'm sure Megan is, working. I attended the Michigan Association of Planner, did a webinar two weeks ago. MTA did a webinar last week, and then they had pretty much the same presentation today in Lansing. But basically, fundamentally, there's what's called a CREO, which is, do you remember what CREO stands for? Something renewable energy, or is comparable, maybe, comparable renewable energy?
Comprehensive?
Comprehensive, I think it is, and what it basically says is that your renewable energy ordinances for, I think it's solar if it's 50 megawatts or more, wind if it's 100 megawatts or more, and then for battery storage, I'm not sure what the parameters are. 50 megawatts, that they have to, your ordinance has to meet what the state has, or it automatically goes to the Michigan State Public Utilities Commission for approval.
They're also talking about a workable ordinance, and so I think, so I would like to have something, you know, to work with you. I know,
Yeah.
you know, as planners, you have done ordinances in the past, and I know this is kind of a work in progress, but I was made aware pretty recently that there has been some inquiry, and I will tell you that because we have the really large, what I call erector set transmission lines in our community that goes through some farmland, I do think that we may ultimately have, you know, developers looking at Dexter Township, so I think, you know, we want to be prepared. And also, if we don't have that CREO, then it automatically goes to the state, and then we have no input. So I think I'm gonna try to compile information. I've been working with Laura Sanders. There's a lot, we're trying to figure out about overlap around the open space preservation work that we are also trying to do in the township. So it's kind of convoluted, and like, I don't know if you have anything you want to say right now, but we definitely wanna,
No, that's something that
we need to work on.
it should be on the list of zoning ordinance
Yeah.
amendments that are looked at in the next year. And really, you have a couple of decisions in terms of, there's the large-scale utilities, solar or wind. Probably not gonna get wind here.
Yeah.
It's more likely that it'd be solar. And then it's also your approach of, okay, if it's not this large scale, which for 50 megawatts, it's around 600 to 650 acres. Below that also, there could be utility scale solar happening, or also what do you have when people have accessory, and looking at those. And so then it's also, there's also some, I'm sure it went over in the seminars that you attended, coordination with neighbors.
Right.
Because 600 acres is a lot, and one of the wrinkles is it's not clear in the state legislation if somebody has some land in Dexter Township and Webster Township.
You have to have the same CREO.
Right, and you don't have the same CREO, or one of you doesn't, or maybe Hamburg Township doesn't, and they're in Livingston County. Maybe they don't have one, then it might invalidate the project then isn't subject to the two that do have CREOs, it automatically goes to the state. So there are some things where it's worthwhile to talk to your neighboring municipalities and say, hey, like, and you can also, what I'm seeing also is people writing triggers. So a trigger in the zoning ordinance is, if this happens, then these laws happen. So if PA whatever goes into effect because there is a ballot initiative
Right.
against it and whatnot, then these are the things that'll happen. Or if it's 50 megawatts or more, or 100 megawatts, if it meets those definitions of utility size scale solar in those state laws, then these are the regulations. If it's below that, these are the other regulations.
Okay.
So you kind of, there's a bunch of different approaches, and that might be good, again, to talk to a subcommittee, but if you have a subcommittee kind of hash some things out and then come and have decision points. But
We
I think-
also want to have like a lot of public process, because there's a lot of concern. We've been hearing from some of our community that there's a lot of concern around the legislation and just a lot of not knowing, like, what people are hearing is that if there's a project, we don't have any control over it, there's just a lot of information. So the board discussed last week, figuring out the timing and the process on a town hall. I kind of feel like this body should be the one in coordination with the board as we move forward, maybe doing an intro and working through ordinance, and then, you know, obviously there will be a public hearing on ordinance, but I personally feel like you can't provide too much information to citizens, so the more we do, and we just need to figure out a process for that, I think.
We'd be happy to help with that.
Yeah, great, okay. So that is kind of like a hot topic, I would say, in the community, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else before our next meeting. Well, you were at the meeting. Was there anything I forgot? We're working on budgets.
Yeah.
But we have not adopted any yet. To be honest with you, I did not come, like, I didn't go through the agenda to look at it. Sam, am I forgetting anything? Okay.
Yeah.
wasn't present at the last meeting, I didn't
Oh.
watch the full meeting.
In the loop also, we are working towards a single hauler ordinance, and also, you know, doing an RFP, and there is a survey on the township website if our citizens want to give input on their service. Because I don't know about you, but
Yeah,
my
there was
service was just
Wait.
acquired by another one, and I didn't get pickup for 3 weeks, so I'm kind of like frustrated right now. So, yeah, so if you want to give input to your service level and what your thoughts are, that survey is on the township website, is my understanding.
Yeah, I
And
clicked on it a couple of days ago. I don't remember where I was to find it, though.
It's on the homepage.
on the homepage.
website.
Right.
Yeah, that's really important to hear from residents about their thoughts on that and their level of service satisfaction, blah, blah, blah. So, I think that's it. Yeah, there's a election and then 9-day early voting. The 9-day early voting will be at Sylvan Township. So, because we're doing a consolidation of early voting, because that's a brand new program and it's kind of complicated. So if anybody that wants to vote, you know, in the 9 days before, they go to Sylvan Township. And Dexter, your ability to vote as a Dexter Township resident will be implemented there. And then the day of the vote will be here. I think I got everything. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Concerns of planning commission members, director of planning and zoning, township supervisor, recording secretary. Let's start down at that end. Megan, anything?
No, just thank you for your hard work.
Well, thank you. You guided us through some real complicated, I mean, one of them didn't look that complicated, it was really complicated. The other one looked complicated and the solution was not complicated, but, you know, you were doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes to get that to us, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. Were the motions helpful as they were written?
Yep,
Okay. If there's any room for improvement, let us know.
thank you.
I'll get the you're right next time.
It's still early. Is my turn?
Yep.
Okay, so I just had a question mechanically, like, once the ordinance changes, then the ordinance is on the website, so I guess the website gets changed, then do we get issued like replacement pages for our manual, or do we do that ourselves? I don't know, I've never been through an ordinance change.
I don't know that I have either, but I think the old one has a couple of pages or several pages of changes that I guess you have to kind of read through those to go to the, it would seem better to me, you know, kind of like all the revisions of the master plan, if at some point, whenever you think that's appropriate, all that gets incorporated certainly into one document on the website. And we would probably ask that we get hard copies of those, like clean documents, not have to, find our own,
We can give you replacement pages, and what we might do is give you a whole section if there's a
That makes
lot.
sense.
yeah, section
So-
would be good, because these aren't gonna be one-for-one pages, I don't think.
No, not if,
Section would be
not if you
great.
eliminate that table.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
I don't really have anything except to say that I really did like how you put the packet together with the motions. They guided us through as we were preparing before coming here tonight. Thank you.
Welcome.
I'm good.
The only thing I have, and I don't want this to sound petty, I brought it up at ZBA too, when the next meeting it was fixed, just if the packets could be stapled, so like the minutes are stapled together, you know, whatever the public hearings were each stapled together, Boardman Farms thing stapled together, so once we undo this and, you know, I spread them out on the table or drop them on the floor, I've got some hope of getting it back together.
I support that, but actually we need to go further because some pages are separate motions and you can't staple them together. And I
Yeah.
personally think that it's impossible to, well, next to impossible, it's very difficult to follow. I got completely lost several times tonight and I just, I mean, so we're saving 4 pieces of paper. And I think for the amount of staff time, like I know for the board of trustees, I know we're trying to save paper. I completely support, you know, sustainability and you know, being cognizant of protecting trees. But I also think that the amount of staff time and for making this happen, I know the board of trustees agenda, we have asked them now to number each page so we can follow it. That takes a tremendous amount of time also. So I think you have to kind of weigh, you know, I mean, I don't know if we want to just keep it on, like, I see you have your computer, which maybe, I don't know. I just personally, like, there was one time where I literally couldn't find the first part, it was the second zoning table. I couldn't find the first page of the table, like and I found it because it was behind the resolution from the previous one, and because I had already flipped that over, like, I don't know, I couldn't do it. And so, I feel like, especially if we have public here, it's kinda, like, I'm like, this, you know, like.
I totally
felt
relate,
like-
I had almost exactly that same issue at ZBA where there were, I don't know, you know, 3 things we were doing, and I couldn't find one of them because it was actually, the first page of that was the back page of the one
Yeah.
before, you
So
know?
what I
And there's your
think
extra
what we
pieces
need
of
to do
paper.
is, for each motion, make it 2-sided, right? So
Yeah.
if it's an issue, that make it all 2-sided, that's great. But don't put a new motion on the back of another motion. That's
Mhm.
where we get
So
lost.
each one of these issues
And I will
is
ask
grouped
them to
together,
do that on the
stapled.
board level, you know,
Yeah,
for
and we can add page, I think, number one, I realized tonight that we can add a footer in the Adobe when we put it together and have all page numbers, and that would be helpful.
But if you have an addition,
And then we can put in blank pages so that it double sides the same way and has breaks.
Okay.
And we can do that from the next packet.
yeah, just, as long as it's the same, whatever, so, like, for each item on the agenda, this
Right.
should all be stapled together.
Mhm.
That would be so helpful. Okay, fantastic.
That does help.
Cause I
I do have
kinda
a problem.
got super lost.
I literally, I stapled all of mine together and I still got lost.
Yeah, because some of them were like the next motion, that one, I'm like, oh, where the hell is it? I'm like,
I
looking,
got lost.
finally, like, I can't find it, I give up, I must have left it at home, but it was in here,
There's
so.
a lot of sections in
Yeah,
this
so
packet.
you get what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah, and you had an especially complicated packet this evening.
Oh, okay.
I don't anticipate there'll be as much. If you start to get a lot of development proposals, then we'll need to look at it, but I think that we can solve some of these
Okay,
problems.
Great, that was my only comment,
Great, thank you.
concern, excuse me.
No, and I don't have any concerns other than a comment. Like, if we are being asked to review a full, final site plan, I know we did not get into details of this site plan tonight because we knew this group was in approval for it. It came before us before, but sometimes it's difficult to see those full site plans on the computer and impossible on an 8.5 by 11. So if it's a critical site plan that we need a full set, I understand that's expensive to make those types of copies. But if it's
It's,
something,
Developer, that's not.
Look,
I
I'm
agree.
toting the big drawings, they provide that to us, don't they? You didn't have to,
They
or
should, yeah.
township didn't have to do that, right?
I think they only provided 3 though, and then I'll double check
really?
with the,
I
Well, you
thought
can
it was my
request that.
understanding that they
I've got
have to
probably 2
provide,
from last time and the same
provide
thing
a
I
copy
think this
for
time.
each staff member and then one for every person on the
Yeah,
commission. That was my understanding, that's why I had asked for the updated plans, because I have a 13-inch computer screen, it's a little hard to zoom in, and then, you're zooming into you're trying to zoom back out and then move to the next page, so, but that was my understanding, was that they were supposed to provide those for every person on the commission.
Okay, I apologize.
That,
What's the next
No big
size
deal, we'll
above
get
legal?
11 by
Yes.
17.
11 by 17 sometimes can work.
B-size.
Right, yeah.
Can we print 11 by 17 here? Well, that's.
That's the
we're-
developer,
We're gonna
that's
ask,
on the developer to provide that.
we're gonna,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna ask.
We
We'll,
should have to pay
we'll
for
figure it out
yeah.
for the next one.
Thank you, that's all I had.
Sam, you have anything for us? We're up to public comment. We should probably just maybe reflect in the minutes that there is no public. Anything we need to talk about for future agenda items? We kind of covered that, I think, with the list of things. In that case, a motion to adjourn would be appreciated.
Move to adjourn.
Moved by Hurd, support by Abbott. All those in favor, please say yes.
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 Those opposed, say no. Motion